The voice cuts through the afternoon silence like glass shattering on concrete. These wild tales of yours end today, young lady. The laughter that follows isn't kind. It's the sharp, dismissive sound adults make when they think a child has finally pushed too far. 7 staff members from Riverside Elementary crowd into Principal Hammond's cramped office, all pressed suits and clipboard authority, surrounding a small desk where 9-year-old Lexi Hartwell sits with her backpack clutched tight against her chest. At the center of this tribunal stands Dr. Patricia Hammond herself, silver-rimmed glasses catching the fluorescent light, arms crossed like she's personally offended by everything this child represents. She's built her 30-year career on order, on rules, on making sure children understand their place in the hierarchy of adult wisdom. Behind her, the other staff members nod in rehearsed agreement. Vice Principal Morris with his perpetual frown, guidance counselor Mrs. Brennan with her fake concerned expression, and teacher after teacher who've apparently had enough of one little girl's disruptive imagination. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The girl doesn't flinch. She's smaller than most kids her age, dark hair pulled back in 2 simple braids, wearing a faded purple sweater that's seen too many wash cycles. Her hands remain steady on her backpack straps, fingers gripping with a precision that seems almost trained. But nobody in this room notices details like that. They see what they expect to see. A problem child who needs correcting. Dr. Hammond steps closer, her expensive perfume mixing with the stale air of an office that's seen too many disciplinary meetings. Do you understand why you're here, Lexi? The girl's voice is quiet but clear. Because you think I'm lying. Not think. No. Hammond's tone drops to that special register educators use when they want to sound both disappointed and authoritative. Mrs. Patterson says you told her class that your mother jumps out of airplanes for work. Mr. Davis reports you claiming she can hold her breath underwater for 20 minutes. And yesterday, she glances at her notes. You apparently told the entire playground that your mom once carried a wounded soldier 12 miles through enemy territory. The room fills with that particular adult smugness that comes from catching a child in an obvious fabrication. Someone actually snickers. Mrs. Brennan shakes her head with theatrical sadness, like she's witnessing a tragedy in slow motion. Lexi, the guidance counselor's voice drips with condescending patience. We understand that having a single parent can be difficult. Sometimes children create elaborate fantasy stories to cope with absent father figures or, "My mom's not absent." The interruption is soft but firm. She's deployed, right? Hammond's smile could cut paper. Deployed where, exactly? What does this mysterious military mother of yours actually do? There's a calculation happening behind those young eyes. An assessment of risk and necessity and how much this particular conversation might cost her. The adults interpret this pause as guilty hesitation. They exchange those knowing glances that say, "Here it comes. The breakdown. The admission of lies." She protects people, Lexi says finally. That's all I can say. The explosion of adult laughter is immediate. Vice Principal Morris actually slaps his knee. Oh, that's rich. She protects people. Let me guess. She's a superhero too. What your daughter needs. Dr. Hammond leans against her desk like she's delivering a medical diagnosis. Is a dose of reality. These attention-seeking fabrications have disrupted 3 different classrooms this week. Other children are starting to believe these wild stories. And frankly, it's becoming a problem for our educational environment. She pulls out a thick folder, the kind reserved for students who've crossed multiple lines. Compulsive lying is a serious behavioral issue, Mrs. She pauses, realizes she doesn't actually know the mother's name, has never met her, has never seen her at pickup or parent conferences. What did you say your mother's name was again? I didn't. The simple response throws Hammond off her rhythm. She was expecting defensiveness, maybe some civilian appeal to school policies. This calm redirection feels almost professional. Well, regardless, Hammond recovers, straightening her shoulders. We've made our decision. Lexi is suspended for 3 days. When she returns, We'll expect a complete apology to every class she's disrupted with these military fantasies, plus a written essay about the importance of honesty. She slides an official suspension form across the desk. Your mother will need to sign this and attend a mandatory parent conference before you're allowed back. And Lexi, when she comes in, we're going to have a very serious conversation about appropriate boundaries between reality and imagination. The girl stares at the paper without reaching for it. Her breathing follows a deliberate pattern: 4 counts in, hold for 4, 4 counts out, hold for 4. It's subtle, but there's something almost tactical about the rhythm, like someone taught her to control stress responses under pressure. Is there a problem? Morris steps forward, his voice carrying that edge adults use when they want compliance, not questions. No, sir. Lexi finally takes the paper, folds it carefully, and tucks it into her backpack with the same precision she's shown throughout this meeting. May I call my mom now? Of course you may. Hammond's tone suggests she's being generous, though I suspect you'll find it difficult to reach someone who doesn't exist. More laughter, more head shaking, more certainty that they've just solved a problem through proper adult authority. The girl pulls out a phone. Not a kid's toy, but a serious piece of hardware with a case that looks military grade. She dials a number from memory, puts it on speaker like she's done this before. It rings once. Hartwell. The voice that answers isn't what anyone in that room expected. It's crisp, professional, with edges that suggest someone accustomed to giving orders and having them followed without question. There's background noise too, not household sounds, but something that might be helicopter rotors in the distance. Hi, Mom. Lexi's entire demeanor shifts, becomes more relaxed but somehow more alert. I need pickup from school. Everything okay, baby? They say I've been making up stories about you again. A pause. Then something that might be a very dangerous laugh. Put me on speaker, Lex. Let's clear this up. The room has gone completely silent. Hammond's confident expression wavers just slightly as she realizes the voice coming through that phone carries an authority she's never heard before. It's the kind of voice that's used to operating in situations where mistakes have consequences more serious than detention. This is Dr. Patricia Hammond, Principal of Riverside Elementary. To whom am I speaking? Dr. Hammond. The tone could freeze water. This is Commander Rachel Hartwell, United States Navy. And you just suspended my daughter for telling the truth. The words hit the room like a physical blow. Someone drops a clipboard. The sound echoes in the sudden, absolute silence as 7 adults try to process what they just heard. Tomorrow, these same people will learn the difference between education authority and operational clearance. They'll discover that some stories sound impossible because they're classified. They'll understand that when a 9-year-old mentions 12-mile combat carries and underwater endurance tests, she might not be fantasizing. She might be accidentally revealing details from bedtime stories about missions that officially never happened. But right now, in this moment, they're just beginning to realize that their comfortable assumptions about military mothers and absent parents and children who make things up might have been catastrophically wrong. The phone line crackles with interference that sounds suspiciously like encrypted communications. In the background, that helicopter noise is getting louder. The silence stretches for exactly 3 heartbeats before Dr. Hammond's composure snaps back into place like a rubber band. She reaches across her desk and deliberately ends the call with a sharp tap, the kind of aggressive finger jab that says, "I'm in charge here." Well, she announces to the room with forced brightness, that was certainly creative. Her voice carries that particular tone administrators perfect when they refuse to admit they might be wrong. Anyone can claim to be military over the phone. Voice impersonation, coaching from relatives. Children are remarkably resourceful when it comes to supporting their fantasies. The staff members exchange glances, some relieved, others looking less certain than they did 5 minutes ago. Mrs. Brennan adjusts her glasses nervously. The background noise did sound rather authentic. Background noise can be faked. Vice Principal Morris jumps in, eager to support his superior. There are apps for that now. Helicopter sounds, radio chatter. Hollywood has made it very easy to manufacture military authenticity. He makes air quotes around the last 2 words, his voice dripping with skepticism. Hammond nods approvingly. Exactly. What we're dealing with here is a very sophisticated form of attention-seeking behavior. The child has clearly enlisted outside help to maintain her elaborate fiction. She looks down at Lexi with what she probably thinks is compassionate concern. Sweetheart, we understand that you want your mother to seem special, but lying about military service is actually illegal. It's called stolen valor, and it's very serious. Lexi's hands tighten on her backpack straps. For just a moment, her carefully maintained composure cracks, and something flashes in her eyes. Not the hurt feelings of a caught child, but something sharper, more dangerous, like she's calculating whether these adults are worth the energy it would take to correct them. My mom doesn't lie, she says quietly. Of course she doesn't, dear. Mrs. Brennan's tone could drown someone in artificial sweetness. But sometimes adults embellish stories to make their children feel special. Maybe your mother told you she was in the military, and it grew from there. She is in the military. Lexi. Hammond's patience is wearing thin, the fake kindness beginning to show its sharp edges. Enough. We've been more than accommodating with these fantasies. But this ends now. You will take that suspension letter home to your actual guardian, grandmother, aunt, whoever is really taking care of you, and they will attend the mandatory conference. She pulls out a different form, this one printed on official school district letterhead. In fact, given the escalation of this behavior, we're also recommending psychological evaluation. Persistent lying at this level suggests deeper issues that need professional intervention. The word psychological hits the room like a gavel. Final. Definitive. The kind of label that follows a kid through their entire school career. Several staff members nod sagely, like they're witnessing a necessary but unfortunate intervention. Mr. Davis, Lexi's homeroom teacher, speaks up for the first time. Principal Hammond, I should mention, Lexi's academic performance is actually exceptional. Straight A's, advanced reading level, mature problem-solving skills. This lying issue seems to be isolated, which makes it even more concerning. Hammond doesn't miss a beat. Intelligent children who create elaborate deceptions often have the most serious underlying psychological issues. They're calculating, manipulative. It indicates a level of premeditation that's frankly disturbing in someone so young. She leans forward, studying Lexi like a specimen under a microscope. Tell me, young lady, when exactly did these military mother stories begin? What specific event triggered this need to invent a heroic fantasy parent? Lexi meets her gaze steadily. They're not stories. Everything is a story, dear. The question is whether it's true or false. Hammond's voice takes on a lecturing tone, the kind that says, I'm about to teach you something important, and your stories have several inconsistencies. She pulls out a manila folder, opens it with theatrical precision. Mrs. Patterson notes that you claimed your mother jumps out of airplanes for work, but you also told Mr. Davis she works underwater. These occupations are mutually exclusive. Then there's the claim about carrying wounded soldiers, which would require your mother to be deployed in an active combat zone. She closes the folder with a snap. The United States military hasn't had women in direct combat roles until very recently, and certainly not in the specialized units you're describing. Your timeline doesn't match reality. Morris nods enthusiastically. Exactly. The child has been watching too many action movies. Navy SEALs, Special Forces, these are all male-dominated units. She's mixing up Hollywood fiction with reality. But, Lexi starts. No buts. Hammond's voice carries the finality of someone who's made up her mind and refuses to be confused by additional information. You've had multiple opportunities to tell the truth. Instead, you've doubled down on increasingly elaborate lies, even going so far as to stage that phone call. She stands, smoothing down her skirt with the satisfied air of someone who's just solved a difficult problem. The suspension stands. 3 days with mandatory psychological evaluation before return. And Lexi, when your real guardian comes in for the conference, we're going to discuss long-term consequences if this behavior continues. The threat hangs in the air like smoke. Long-term consequences in school speak meant things like special programs, behavior modification plans, possibly even transfer to alternative schools for problem children. Mrs. Brennan pulls out her own paperwork. We'll also need to document this incident for your permanent record. Persistent dishonesty, disruption of classroom environment, potential psychological concerns. That won't be necessary. The voice comes from the doorway, quiet but carrying enough authority to stop all conversation instantly. Everyone turns to see the school secretary, Mrs. Rodriguez, standing in the entrance with an expression somewhere between confusion and concern. Principal Hammond? Her voice wavers slightly. There's someone here to see you. About Lexi Hartwell. If it's another family member trying to support this child's fantasies. Ma'am, Mrs. Rodriguez interrupts, something she's never done in 15 years of employment. I think you need to see this person. Now. Through the office window, they can see a figure in the outer office. Tall, wearing what looks like military dress uniform, moving with the kind of precise efficiency that suggests someone accustomed to operating in high-stakes environments. The uniform is dark blue, decorated with ribbons and insignia that catch the afternoon light. Hammond's confident expression falters for just a moment. Then she straightens her shoulders, preparing to deal with whatever elaborate performance this child's family has staged. Fine. Send them in. Let's end this charade once and for all. But as Mrs. Rodriguez steps aside and the figure in uniform enters the office, something in the room's atmosphere changes completely. The casual dismissiveness evaporates. The comfortable certainty that they're dealing with a lying child and her enabling family disappears like smoke. Because the woman who walks through that door isn't someone playing dress-up or staging a performance. She's someone who's earned every ribbon on her chest, every insignia on her collar, through methods that most of these civilians will never understand and in places they'll never visit. And she's heard every word they just said about her daughter. The woman who steps through the doorway moves with a precision that makes everyone in the room unconsciously straighten their posture. She's not tall, maybe 5'6", but she carries herself in a way that makes the cramped office feel suddenly smaller, like her presence has shifted the gravitational center of the room. The dress blue uniform fits her perfectly, not the way a costume does, but the way gear fits someone who's worn it through ceremonies and deployments and moments that mattered. But it's not the uniform that makes Dr. Hammond's confident expression begin to crack around the edges. It's the way this woman scans the room in exactly 2 seconds. Exits, personnel positions, potential threats, with the systematic thoroughness of someone whose survival has depended on environmental awareness. It's the way she notices Lexi's defensive posture and the arrangement of adults around the desk before her eyes even register faces or name tags. Most of all, it's the absolute stillness she radiates. Not the awkward motionlessness of someone uncomfortable in formal settings, but the complete calm of someone who's operated in situations where unnecessary movement could mean death. Dr. Hammond. Her voice carries the same authority they heard through the phone, but in person it has weight, presence, the kind of command tone that makes junior personnel snap to attention without thinking. I'm Commander Rachel Hartwell. I believe you have some concerns about my daughter. The principal recovers first, her 30 years of dealing with difficult parents kicking into automatic mode. Commander Hartwell. She pronounces the rank like she's not entirely sure it's real. Thank you for coming. Though I have to say, your daughter's claims about your occupation have been quite disruptive to our learning environment. The woman, Commander Hartwell, if she's telling the truth, doesn't respond immediately. Instead, she looks at Lexi, and something passes between them. Not words, just a brief eye contact that seems to communicate volumes. Lexi's rigid posture relaxes slightly, though her grip on the backpack remains firm. What specifically has she said that you find disruptive? The question is asked mildly, but there's something underneath it that makes Vice Principal Morris shift uncomfortably in his chair. Mrs. Brennan jumps in with her practiced guidance counselor voice. Well, she's been telling rather elaborate stories about military operations. Underwater missions, parachute jumps, combat rescues, frankly, the kinds of things children pick up from action movies. We're concerned about the line between imagination and, well, dishonesty. I see. Commander Hartwell's expression doesn't change, but her eyes move to each staff member in turn, cataloging faces, assessing threat levels. It's a predator's survey, done so smoothly that most of them don't even realize they're being evaluated. And you've concluded that these are fabrications? Come now. Dr. Hammond's voice takes on that edge of irritation she uses with parents who refuse to see their children's obvious problems. Surely you can understand our position. A 9-year-old claiming her mother performs military operations that frankly sound like something out of a Tom Cruise movie? We have to maintain educational standards here. Educational standards. Commander Hartwell repeats the phrase like she's testing its weight. What educational standard requires you to call a child a liar without investigating her claims? The question lands like a punch to the solar plexus. Mr. Davis, who's been increasingly uncomfortable with the whole proceeding, looks down at his hands. Mrs. Rodriguez, still hovering in the doorway, takes a small step backward. We did investigate, Morris protests. We checked military records. There's no Rachel Hartwell listed in any public database of active duty personnel. Something that might be amusement flickers across Commander Hartwell's face. You checked public databases for special operations personnel. She lets that hang in the air for exactly 3 seconds. Mr. Morris, what do you know about operational security? Well, I'm sure there are privacy concerns. OPSEC isn't about privacy. It's about keeping operators alive. Her voice has gone completely flat, professional, the way it might sound giving a briefing to junior officers who need to understand something critical. Personnel assigned to certain units don't appear in public records because public records get people killed. She reaches into her jacket, a movement that makes 3 staff members flinch instinctively, and pulls out a leather wallet. Not a typical ID holder, something more substantial with multiple cards and what looks like official seals. Dr. Hammond, you mentioned checking military records. Did you happen to check with the Department of Defense directly? Or did you limit your investigation to Wikipedia and Google searches? The principal's face flushes red. We followed appropriate protocols for verifying. You followed no protocols. The interruption is quiet but absolute. You made assumptions based on your personal beliefs about what women in the military can and cannot do. Then you punished my daughter for contradicting your assumptions. She opens the wallet, pulls out a card that's clearly not standard issue. It's heavier than normal ID, with multiple security features and text that's partially redacted even on the card itself. She hands it to Hammond with the casual confidence of someone who's never worried about whether her credentials will check out. Dr. Hammond takes the card with shaking hands. Her eyes scan it, and with each line she reads, her face goes a shade paler. The room watches her expression change from confident skepticism to confusion to something approaching alarm. This says. She looks up at Commander Hartwell, then back at the card. This clearance level. I've never seen anything like this. Most people haven't. That's intentional. Commander Hartwell's voice remains level, patient, like she's explaining something to a student who's struggling with a difficult concept. Dr. Hammond, my daughter told you I jump out of airplanes for work. That's accurate. Halo insertion is part of my job requirements. She mentioned underwater operations. Also accurate. Combat diving is a core SEAL competency. She said I once carried a wounded operator 12 miles through hostile territory. She pauses, and for just a moment, something darker passes across her face. A memory, perhaps, of sand and blood and choices made under fire. That happened in Syria. 3 years ago. The wounded operator was my teammate. His name was Petty Officer James Chun. He lived because I carried him to the extraction point. The mission is still classified, but the Navy Cross citation is a matter of public record if you know where to look. The silence in the room is deafening. Mrs. Brennan has gone completely white. Mr. Davis is staring at his hands like he's never seen them before. Morris looks like he's trying to disappear into his chair. But Dr. Hammond isn't finished making mistakes. Even if this is all true, she stammers, desperation creeping into her voice. That doesn't change the fact that your daughter has been disruptive. She's shared classified information in a public school setting. She's created an environment where other children are being exposed to inappropriate military content. Commander Hartwell's expression doesn't change, but the temperature in the room seems to drop 10 degrees. When she speaks, her voice has acquired an edge that could cut through steel. Dr. Hammond, are you suggesting that my daughter's accurate descriptions of her mother's service constitute a security breach? Well, if the information is classified, what's classified is the location, timing, and tactical details of specific operations. What's not classified is the general fact that Navy SEALs perform the missions my daughter described. That information is available in recruiting brochures. She steps closer to Hammond's desk, and her movement has the fluid economy of someone who's trained to operate in three-dimensional space: land, sea, and air. But more importantly, are you seriously suggesting that a child should be punished for being proud of her mother's service? The question hangs in the air like a blade. Dr. Hammond opens her mouth, closes it, opens it again. She's smart enough to recognize that she's walked into a minefield, but not experienced enough to know how to back out safely. The disruption to the classroom environment was caused by your staff's refusal to believe a child telling the truth. Commander Hartwell's voice cuts through the excuse like it's tissue paper. Mrs. Patterson, Mr. Davis, Mrs. Brennan, they all chose to label my daughter a liar rather than simply asking for verification. They created the disruption by publicly questioning her honesty instead of privately confirming her statements. She looks around the room, meeting each person's eyes in turn. How many of you have children? How many of you want your kids to be proud of your work? To tell their friends about what makes their parents special? The questions hit like individual hammer blows, because every person in that room does want their children to be proud of them. Every parent wants to be their child's hero. And now they're forced to confront the fact that they've spent the last hour trying to destroy that exact dynamic for someone else. Commander Hartwell reaches into her pocket again, pulls out her phone. The same military-grade device Lexi had used earlier, but when an adult holds it, its serious nature becomes more apparent. She speed dials a number, puts it on speaker. JSOC Operations, Secure Line, Staff Duty Officer speaking. The voice coming through the phone is crisp, professional, with background noise that unmistakably suggests a high-security military communications center. Dr. Hammond's eyes go wide as she realizes she's listening to a real military operations center, not some staged performance. Staff Duty Officer, this is Commander Hartwell, authentication code Bravo 77 Charlie. I need verification for civilian authorities. Stand by for verification, Commander. A pause, the sound of keyboards clicking, databases being accessed. Commander Rachel Hartwell, Naval Special Warfare Development Group, currently assigned to JSOC Special Activities Division. Authentication confirmed. How can I assist you, ma'am? The formal military precision of the exchange is like watching a machine operate. No wasted words, no uncertainty, just professional efficiency that speaks of systems and protocols tested under the most demanding circumstances imaginable. I need confirmation of my current operational status for civilian school administrators who have questioned my credentials. Roger that, Commander. You are currently on approved leave status following deployment cycle completion. Your next assignment brief is scheduled for 0800 Monday. Is there a specific security concern we should be aware of? Commander Hartwell's eyes sweep the room one more time, taking in the shocked faces, the dropped jaws, the dawning realization that every assumption they've made has been catastrophically wrong. Negative. Just civilian education about military family dynamics. Hartwell out. JSOC out. The line goes dead, leaving behind a silence so complete that the fluorescent lights seem to hum like jet engines. Dr. Hammond is still holding that security clearance card like it might explode. Her hands are visibly shaking now, and when she speaks, her voice has lost all its earlier authority. Commander, we had no way of knowing. You had every way of knowing. Commander Hartwell's response is quiet but implacable. You could have made one phone call to verify before suspending my daughter. You could have chosen to believe a child who has never lied to you before. You could have treated her with the basic respect you'd want your own children to receive. She moves to where Lexi sits, places one hand gently on her daughter's shoulder. The gesture is protective but not possessive, the touch of someone who's learned to offer comfort without restricting movement. Instead, you chose to humiliate her in front of your staff. You chose to question her honesty, her family, and her right to be proud of her mother's service. You chose to recommend psychological evaluation for a child whose only crime was telling the truth about her parents' career. The words land like artillery shells, each one precise, devastating, impossible to defend against. Because every accusation is true, documented, witnessed by everyone in the room. And Commander Hartwell isn't finished. Commander Hartwell doesn't raise her voice. Doesn't need to. When someone has commanded operations where lives hang on split-second decisions, managing a room full of embarrassed educators feels like a training exercise. But there's something building in her expression. Not anger exactly, more like the cold calculation of someone deciding how much force a situation requires. Dr. Hammond, she continues, her tone remaining professionally level. You mentioned that my daughter has been disruptive to your educational environment. Let's examine that claim. She pulls out a small notebook from her jacket pocket. Not a civilian planner, but something that looks like it's seen serious use. Military green cover, pages that have been written on in multiple environments, the kind of field notes that get referenced during debriefings. Lexi told me about each incident as it happened. I documented them because, in my experience, patterns of institutional bias often escalate unless properly addressed. She flips through pages, finding specific entries. September 15th. Mrs. Patterson asked students to share what makes their families special. Lexi mentioned that I serve in the Navy. Mrs. Patterson publicly corrected her, stating that women don't do those kinds of jobs in the military. Mrs. Patterson, who's been silent until now, shifts uncomfortably. I was just trying to encourage realistic career aspirations. You were projecting outdated assumptions onto a child's accurate statement. The interruption is surgical, precise. September 22nd. Mr. Davis asked the class to write about heroes. Lexi wrote about naval special operations, describing water survival techniques she's observed during my training. Mr. Davis marked her paper down for unrealistic content and suggested she choose more appropriate role models. Mr. Davis looks like he wants to sink through the floor. The details seemed so specific, so advanced for a 9-year-old. They were specific because they were accurate. And they were advanced because my daughter pays attention when I explain my work in age-appropriate terms. Commander Hartwell turns another page. October 3rd. Playground incident. Several students questioned whether Lexi was lying about her mother's job. Instead of addressing the accusation privately, playground supervisor Mrs. Chun publicly asked Lexi to stop telling stories in front of 30 other children. The documentation is devastating in its thoroughness. Each incident carefully noted, with dates, times, witnesses, exact quotes where possible. It's the kind of evidence gathering that speaks of someone accustomed to building cases that will stand up to rigorous scrutiny. October 9th. Parent-teacher conference request sent home. I was deployed, unable to attend. No accommodation offered for military families despite federal requirements for educational institutions receiving defense funding. Commander Hartwell's eyes find Dr. Hammond's. Did you know that this school district receives federal impact aid specifically to support military dependents? The question lands like a depth charge. Because most of the staff didn't know that, haven't thought about the specific legal obligations that come with educating children from military families. But ignorance of the law isn't going to help them now. That funding, Commander Hartwell continues, comes with specific requirements about accommodation and support for military children. Requirements that include understanding the unique challenges of deployment cycles, recognizing the validity of non-traditional family structures, and, most relevantly, not penalizing children for accurate descriptions of their parents' service. She closes the notebook with a sharp snap. In 3 weeks, my daughter has been publicly contradicted 4 times, academically penalized twice, and socially humiliated once, all for telling the truth about her mother's career. Today, you escalated to suspension and recommended psychological evaluation. The math is brutal in its simplicity. Each incident building on the last, creating a pattern of institutional hostility that went far beyond simple misunderstanding. Vice Principal Morris, who's been growing increasingly pale throughout this recitation, tries to mount a defense. Commander, surely you understand our position. We can't have children disrupting classes with fantasy stories about military operations. Fantasy stories. Commander Hartwell repeats the phrase like she's examining a particularly interesting specimen. Mr. Morris, what's your educational background? The question seems to come from nowhere, catching him off guard. Master's in Educational Administration, Bachelor's in Elementary Education, 15 years classroom experience. Any military experience? Security clearance? Operational knowledge of special warfare units? Well, no, but then on what basis did you determine that my daughter's descriptions were fantasy rather than fact? The question is asked with the patience of someone conducting an interrogation. Did you consult with any military personnel? Contact any veterans organizations? Reach out to the local Navy recruiting station for verification? Morris opens his mouth, realizes he has no good answer, closes it again. Or did you simply decide that because her descriptions didn't match your civilian understanding of military operations, they must be false? The silence stretches long enough to become uncomfortable, because that's exactly what they did, and everyone in the room knows it. Mrs. Brennan, perhaps sensing that someone needs to say something, tries to shift the conversation. Commander Hartwell, we're certainly grateful for your service, and we had no intention of disrespecting. Mrs. Brennan, the interruption is gentle but absolute. You recommended psychological evaluation for my daughter. Do you have clinical psychology training? Are you licensed to diagnose mental health conditions in children? No, but as a guidance counselor, I'm trained to identify concerning behaviors. What specifically about my daughter's behavior concerns you? Her academic performance is exemplary. Her conduct record shows no disciplinary problems. Her social interactions are appropriate. The only concerning behavior documented in her file is telling the truth about her mother's job. Commander Hartwell pauses, letting that sink in. So either you're suggesting that honesty is a psychological disorder, or you're recommending clinical intervention because my daughter's reality doesn't match your expectations. The logic is inescapable, brutal in its clarity. Mrs. Brennan has no response because there is no response. Every word of her recommendation has just been systematically dismantled. Dr. Hammond, perhaps realizing that every attempt at justification has only made things worse, tries a different approach. Commander, clearly there have been misunderstandings. Perhaps we could start over. Find a way to move forward that works for everyone. Start over. Commander Hartwell considers this. Dr. Hammond, if one of your teachers was publicly accused of incompetence, formally disciplined, and recommended for psychological evaluation, all based on false accusations, would you suggest they simply start over? That's different. These are professional adults. My daughter is a professional student. She takes her education seriously, follows school rules, respects her teachers, and works hard to maintain academic standards. The only difference between her and your teachers is that she doesn't have a union to protect her when she's falsely accused. Commander Hartwell moves closer to Hammond's desk, and there's something predatory in the movement. Not aggressive exactly, but with the fluid precision of someone who's learned to operate in hostile environments. Let me explain something about military families, Dr. Hammond. Our children grow up differently. They move frequently, adapt to new situations constantly, learn independence and resilience because deployment cycles require it. They also learn to be proud of service, to understand sacrifice, to respect the profession of arms. She gestures toward Lexi, who's been watching this exchange with the quiet attention of someone who's seen her mother handle difficult situations before. My daughter has lived on naval bases her entire life. She's been around special operations personnel since she was old enough to walk. She's attended military ceremonies, met Medal of Honor recipients, watched aircraft carrier operations. Her stories aren't fantasies. They're the reality of her daily life. The explanation is delivered with the precision of someone briefing a command staff, each point building toward an inevitable conclusion. But today, you decided that reality was unacceptable for your educational environment. You chose to punish her for being proud of her mother's service. You recommended psychological intervention for a child whose only crime was honesty. Dr. Hammond is gripping her desk so tightly her knuckles have gone white. Commander, what do you want from us? Is the first honest question anyone has asked all day. Commander Hartwell considers it for a moment, her expression thoughtful rather than angry. I want you to understand that military children are not problems to be solved. They're assets to be valued. They bring unique perspectives, diverse experiences, and often a level of maturity that comes from understanding that freedom has costs. She looks around the room, meeting each person's eyes in turn. I want you to recognize that questioning a child's honesty should be your last resort, not your first response. I want you to understand that some families serve in ways that don't fit civilian expectations, and that's something to celebrate, not pathologize. The demands are reasonable, professional, completely appropriate, which somehow makes them more devastating than anger would have been. And most immediately, Commander Hartwell continues, I want my daughter's suspension rescinded, her academic record cleared of any reference to dishonesty or behavioral problems, and a formal apology from each staff member who participated in today's proceedings. She pauses, and when she speaks again, her voice carries the absolute authority of someone who's accustomed to giving orders that will be followed without question. Because Dr. Hammond, this conversation isn't over. It's just beginning. The silence that follows Commander Hartwell's ultimatum stretches for exactly 15 seconds before Dr. Hammond reaches for her phone with trembling fingers. Not her personal cell phone, but the official landline that connects directly to the district administration building. The kind of call principals only make when situations have escalated beyond their authority to handle. District office? This is Dr. Hammond at Riverside Elementary. I need to speak with Superintendent Williams immediately. Her voice wavers slightly, professional composure cracking around the edges. Yes, it's urgent. Very urgent. She places the call on hold, looking up at Commander Hartwell with something between desperation and calculation. Commander, perhaps we should wait for district leadership before making any permanent decisions about your daughter's status. Permanent decisions? Commander Hartwell's expression doesn't change, but there's something glacial in her tone. Dr. Hammond, you already made permanent decisions. You suspended my daughter, recommended psychological evaluation, and documented alleged behavioral problems in her academic record. Those decisions are quite permanent unless specifically reversed. She checks her watch, not a casual glance, but the precise time check of someone operating on mission schedules. You have 47 minutes before my next appointment. I suggest you use that time wisely. The implied deadline sends a visible shock through the room. Mr. Davis shifts nervously in his seat. Mrs. Rodriguez, still hovering in the doorway, looks like she's witnessing a car accident in slow motion. Even Lexi, who's been quietly observing this adult power struggle, seems to sense that something significant is about to happen. Dr. Hammond's phone buzzes. She grabs it like a lifeline. Superintendent Williams? Thank you for taking my call. We have a situation here that requires your immediate attention. The conversation that follows is stilted, awkward, Hammond trying to explain the circumstances without admitting how completely she's mishandled the situation. Her end of the dialogue is a masterclass in bureaucratic damage control. Yes, sir, a military family. Navy, apparently. There's been some confusion about verification of service claims. She glances nervously at Commander Hartwell. The child has been sharing stories about her mother's deployment, and we felt, well, some of the details seemed. She pauses, listening to something on the other end that's making her face go progressively paler. No, sir, we didn't contact the base for verification. We felt that. What? The federal impact aid requirements? Yes, sir, I understand the implications. Commander Hartwell doesn't appear to be eavesdropping, but her posture suggests she's absorbing every word of Hammond's side of the conversation. Years of operating in hostile environments have given her the ability to extract maximum intelligence from minimal information. 30 minutes? Yes, sir. We'll wait for your arrival. Hammond ends the call, sets the phone down with the careful precision of someone handling unexploded ordnance. Superintendent Williams is coming personally. He's very concerned about potential federal compliance issues. Federal compliance. Commander Hartwell repeats the phrase thoughtfully. That's an interesting way to describe systematic discrimination against military families. Mrs. Brennan, perhaps sensing an opportunity to defend the school's actions, speaks up with forced confidence. Commander, surely you understand that we have to be careful about children sharing inappropriate content in classroom settings. Some military operations might not be suitable for Mrs. Brennan. The interruption is delivered with surgical precision. What specific content has my daughter shared that you consider inappropriate? Well, the descriptions of combat operations, carrying wounded soldiers. My daughter mentioned that I once helped a wounded teammate. She didn't describe blood, violence, weapons, or graphic details. She said I carried someone who was hurt to safety. Commander Hartwell's tone could frost glass. Are you suggesting that helping injured people is inappropriate content for children? The question lands like a physical blow. Because when stripped of assumptions and prejudices, that's exactly what Lexi had said. Her mom helped someone who was hurt. The same thing any paramedic, firefighter, or doctor might do. That's not. She mentioned combat zones, enemy territory. She mentioned that it happened during deployment. Children of police officers talk about their parents working in dangerous neighborhoods. Children of firefighters describe their parents entering burning buildings. Are those conversations also inappropriate? Mrs. Brennan has no answer because there is no answer. Every justification she offers only highlights the arbitrary nature of their response to Lexi's stories. Vice Principal Morris, perhaps feeling like someone needs to defend the school's position, attempts a different approach. Commander, you have to understand our perspective. We're responsible for hundreds of children. We can't verify every claim every student makes about their family members. You're absolutely right, Mr. Morris. The agreement comes so readily that Morris looks surprised, almost hopeful. You can't verify every claim, which is exactly why you shouldn't punish children for making claims you haven't verified. The logical trap snaps shut with audible precision. Morris realizes he's just argued against his own position, but there's no way to walk it back without looking even worse. Commander Hartwell continues with the patience of someone explaining basic tactics to new recruits. In military operations, we have a principle called trust but verify. When someone provides intelligence, we don't dismiss it as false just because it seems unusual. We investigate, we confirm, we make decisions based on facts, not assumptions. She gestures toward the staff members. Today, you operated on the opposite principle. You assumed my daughter was lying because her reality didn't match your expectations. You punished first and investigated never. The parallel to military decision-making is devastating because it highlights just how unprofessional their approach has been. Real leaders don't act on assumptions. Real leaders gather intelligence before making crucial decisions. Mr. Davis, who's been looking increasingly uncomfortable throughout this exchange, finally speaks up. Commander, in my defense, Lexi's descriptions were remarkably detailed, almost like she'd witnessed these operations firsthand. It's meant as an explanation, possibly even a compliment. Instead, it reveals something that makes Commander Hartwell's expression shift subtly, becoming more guarded. Mr. Davis, what exactly are you implying? Nothing negative, just that her knowledge seemed very personal, like she'd been present during military operations. The room goes quiet in a way that feels different from the previous silences. This one has weight, danger, the sense that Mr. Davis has accidentally stepped on something explosive. Commander Hartwell's voice, when she speaks, is carefully controlled. Mr. Davis, are you suggesting that I've exposed my daughter to classified military operations? No, that's not what I meant, because that would be a very serious accusation. the kind that triggers security investigations, background reviews, potentially criminal charges for violations of operational security. Mr. Davis looks like he's about to have a panic attack. Commander, I didn't mean to imply anything inappropriate. I was just noting that her descriptions were very vivid. Vivid because they're based on stories I share with my daughter about the importance of military service. Stories that focus on helping people, protecting others, serving something larger than yourself. Commander Hartwell's tone has gone completely professional, the voice she might use during an official inquiry. Stories that any parent might tell their child about their work. But there's something else in her expression now, a calculation that suggests Mr. Davis's comment has triggered protocols beyond simple annoyance. Because in the world of special operations, accusations about security breaches aren't just professional problems, they're career-ending catastrophes. Mr. Davis, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need a precise answer. Are you formally alleging that I have violated operational security by sharing classified information with my minor daughter? The formality of the question transforms the entire dynamic in the room. This isn't a parent-teacher conference anymore. This is something approaching an official inquiry, with all the legal implications that entails. No, absolutely not. I was just commenting on her storytelling ability. Because if you are making that allegation, I'm required to report it to my command immediately. Security violations are taken very seriously in the special operations community. The investigation would involve detailed interviews with you and every other staff member present today. Mr. Davis has gone completely white. Commander, please, I wasn't alleging anything. I was just trying to understand how she knew so much. Commander Hartwell studies him for a moment, then nods slowly. Mr. Davis, my daughter knows about military operations the same way police officers' children know about law enforcement, or doctors' children understand medical procedures, through age-appropriate conversations about the importance of public service. She pauses, and when she continues, her voice carries a warning that's unmistakable. But I want to be very clear about something. If anyone in this room continues to suggest that my daughter's knowledge represents a security concern, rather than normal family discussions about career service, this conversation will shift from educational issues to federal matters very quickly. The threat is delivered with such professional calm that it takes a moment for its full implications to register. But when they do, the effect is immediate and devastating. Because everyone in that room suddenly realizes they're not just dealing with an angry parent anymore. They're dealing with someone who operates in a world where mistakes have consequences they can't even imagine. And they've been making mistakes all day. The weight of Commander Hartwell's warning settles over the room like smoke from a controlled demolition. Every staff member suddenly understands that they're operating in a minefield where each word could trigger consequences they're not equipped to handle. The comfortable certainty of educational authority has evaporated, replaced by the cold reality that some parents operate in worlds where institutional power means nothing. Dr. Hammond's hands shake slightly as she reorganizes papers that don't need organizing. Commander, perhaps we should wait for Superintendent Williams before discussing any federal implications. Federal implications are already in play, Dr. Hammond. Commander Hartwell's response is delivered with the precision of someone reading from a technical manual. The moment you suspended my daughter for accurate statements about military service, you created a potential violation of the Military Children's Educational Protection Act. When you recommended psychological evaluation based solely on her military family status, you opened the door to discrimination complaints under federal civil rights statutes. She pauses, letting the legal terminology sink in. Because most educators have only a vague understanding of the federal requirements that govern their treatment of military families, and the specifics are more comprehensive than they realize. When Mr. Davis suggested my daughter's knowledge might represent a security concern, he potentially triggered protocols under the Personnel Security Program. These aren't school disciplinary matters anymore. These are compliance issues with federal oversight and criminal penalties. Mrs. Rodriguez, who's been growing increasingly pale throughout this exchange, finally speaks up. Commander, should I be documenting this conversation? For legal purposes. It's a smart question from someone who recognizes that this situation has escalated beyond normal educational procedures. Commander Hartwell considers this for a moment. Mrs. Rodriguez, you should absolutely document everything. Dates, times, statements made, actions taken. Because when this reaches federal review, and it will reach federal review, complete documentation will be essential for everyone involved. The implication is clear. This isn't going away with apologies and good intentions. This has become the kind of incident that generates reports, investigations, and policy reviews at levels these educators have never dealt with. Mr. Davis, who's been spiraling into panic since his security comment backfired, attempts damage control. Commander, I want to apologize unreservedly for any suggestion that you've handled classified information inappropriately. I clearly misunderstood. Mr. Davis, the interruption is gentle but absolute. Your apology is noted, but misunderstanding federal security protocols isn't a minor error. It's the kind of mistake that triggers mandatory reporting requirements. She pulls out her phone again, not to make a call this time, but to reference something on the screen. Naval Criminal Investigative Service takes allegations of security violations very seriously, even when those allegations are clearly unfounded. Once raised, they have to be formally investigated and cleared. The phone feels like a weapon in her hands, not because she's threatening to use it, but because everyone in the room suddenly realizes she might be required to use it whether she wants to or not. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The good news, Commander Hartwell continues with clinical precision, is that investigations typically clear personnel when allegations are obviously baseless. The bad news is that investigations require detailed interviews with all parties involved, including anyone who witnessed or participated in the allegations. Mrs. Brennan makes a small sound that might be a whimper, because she's starting to understand that her attempt to help by recommending psychological evaluation might have triggered a cascade of federal procedures that could consume months of their lives. How many of you have security clearances? Commander Hartwell asks conversationally. Any prior military service? Experience with federal background investigations? The questions are asked mildly, but their implications are terrifying. Because none of them have security clearances, most have never been through federal background checks, and the idea of being interviewed by NCIS agents feels like stepping into a thriller movie. Federal investigators are very thorough. Commander Hartwell explains with the patience of someone who's been through the process multiple times. They interview employers, neighbors, family members. They review financial records, social media accounts, travel history. They're particularly interested in any patterns of bias or discrimination that might affect an individual's trustworthiness in positions of authority. Dr. Hammond's face has gone ashen. Commander, surely this doesn't need to escalate to that level. We can resolve this internally through proper educational channels. Dr. Hammond, you've had multiple opportunities to resolve this through proper educational channels. Instead, you've escalated at every step. Commander Hartwell's tone remains professionally neutral, but there's steel underneath it. You suspended my daughter without investigation. You recommended psychological evaluation without clinical justification. Your staff made allegations about security violations without understanding the implications. She gestures toward Lexi, who's been watching this adult conflict with the quiet attention of someone who's learned to stay invisible during grown-up discussions. My daughter tried to tell you the truth. She offered to let you speak with me directly. She remained respectful even when being publicly called a liar. She did everything right. The contrast is devastating. A 9-year-old handled the situation with more professionalism than the educational staff charged with her care. Meanwhile, Commander Hartwell continues. Your staff chose escalation over investigation, punishment over verification, assumptions over facts. These aren't simple mistakes. These are systematic failures of professional judgment. The sound of footsteps in the hallway interrupts the tension. Heavy, urgent steps that suggest someone approaching with purpose. Mrs. Rodriguez glances toward the door with visible relief. That should be Superintendent Williams. But the figure who appears in the doorway isn't what anyone expected. Yes, it's clearly the superintendent, tall, distinguished, wearing the kind of expensive suit that suggests high-level administrative authority. But he's not alone. Behind him stand two other figures in military dress uniforms, both carrying briefcases and the unmistakable bearing of senior officers. Dr. Hammond. Superintendent Williams's voice is tight with barely controlled tension. "We need to talk. Immediately." He steps into the room, followed by the two military officers, and the cramped office suddenly feels like a command bunker during a crisis briefing. The superintendent's eyes find Commander Hartwell, and something passes between them, recognition, perhaps, or the mutual acknowledgement of professionals who understand the gravity of federal compliance issues. "Commander Hartwell, I'm Superintendent Williams. These are Colonel Martinez from the Regional Education Liaison Office and Commander Singh from Naval Personnel Command. They've been briefing me on the federal implications of this situation. The arrival of additional military personnel transforms the entire dynamic. Because now it's not just an angry parent confronting school officials. It's a federal compliance review with active duty officers present to ensure proper resolution." Colonel Martinez steps forward, her expression professionally neutral, but carrying the authority of someone who's handled similar situations before. "Dr. Hammond, we need to conduct an immediate review of your actions regarding the Hartwell family. This review will determine whether additional federal oversight is required." The word oversight lands like a bomb. Because federal oversight of educational institutions means investigations, compliance audits, potential loss of funding, and the kind of scrutiny that can end careers. "Colonel, surely this is a misunderstanding that we can resolve." Dr. Hammond starts. "Dr. Hammond," Colonel Martinez interrupts with the patience of someone who's heard this response many times before. "Misunderstandings that result in discrimination against military families aren't resolved with apologies. They're resolved with systematic review of policies, procedures, and personnel decisions." She opens her briefcase, pulls out a thick folder that's clearly been prepared during the drive from the district office. "We'll be conducting interviews with all personnel involved, reviewing documentation of the incident, and examining your school's compliance with federal requirements for military family support." Commander Singh, who's been quietly observing the room's occupants, speaks for the first time. "Commander Hartwell, thank you for your patience with this situation. We'll ensure that proper protocols are followed from this point forward." The acknowledgement between military officers is brief but significant, because it establishes that Commander Hartwell isn't just a complaining parent anymore. She's a fellow service member whose concerns are being taken seriously by the chain of command. "Dr. Hammond," Superintendent Williams's voice carries the weight of someone who's just learned his district is under federal scrutiny. "I need you to gather all documentation related to Lexi Hartwell immediately. Every disciplinary record, every teacher report, every communication with the family. Everything." The systematic approach is methodical, professional, and absolutely terrifying for anyone who's made mistakes they hoped would stay buried in school files. Commander Hartwell checks her watch again. "Gentlemen, Colonel Martinez, I appreciate the prompt response. However, I have another appointment in 23 minutes that I cannot postpone." The statement isn't a request or negotiation. It's a simple statement of operational reality. Because whatever else is happening in this office, Commander Hartwell operates on mission schedules that don't accommodate educational bureaucracy. "Of course, Commander," Colonel Martinez responds immediately. "We can handle the administrative review from here. Your daughter's academic record will be cleared, and formal apologies will be documented from all involved personnel. It's not a suggestion. It's a directive delivered with the authority of someone who outranks everyone in the civilian education system." And suddenly, Dr. Hammond realizes that her comfortable world of educational authority has just collided with a federal system where military officers give orders that civilian administrators follow without question. The tables haven't just turned. They've been completely dismantled and rebuilt with an entirely different power structure. The atmosphere in the cramped office shifts dramatically as Colonel Martinez opens a second folder. This one marked with security classifications that make Dr. Hammond's eyes widen in alarm. The casual educational meeting has transformed into something resembling a military tribunal, complete with documentation that clearly extends far beyond this single incident. "Dr. Hammond," Colonel Martinez begins, her voice carrying the measured authority of someone delivering an official briefing. This review encompasses more than just today's events. We've identified a pattern of incidents involving military families at your school that suggests systemic compliance failures. She spreads several documents across Hammond's desk with precise movements. September 12th, Tyler Morrison, son of Marine Staff Sergeant Morrison, received detention for inappropriate aggression after defending himself from bullies who mocked his father's deployment. No investigation of the bullying was conducted. Mrs. Brennan shifts uncomfortably. She remembers that incident, remembers recommending anger management counseling for Tyler without ever addressing the harassment that triggered his response. October 1st, Sarah Chun, daughter of Navy Lieutenant Chun, was marked down in social studies for writing about military bases she'd lived on. Teacher noted lax understanding of normal American communities. Colonel Martinez's tone remains neutral, but there's steel underneath. Lieutenant Chun has been stationed at 7 different bases in the past decade, all within the United States. His daughter's essay about diverse military communities was factually accurate. The documentation is devastating in its thoroughness. Each incident carefully researched, cross-referenced with military records, built into a comprehensive pattern that's impossible to dismiss as isolated misunderstandings. Commander Singh takes over the presentation seamlessly. November 5th, Jamie Rodriguez, son of Army Special Forces operator, suspended for 3 days for disruptive storytelling about his father's training. Investigation shows the child accurately described combat medic procedures he'd observed during a Family Day demonstration at Fort Bragg. Dr. Hammond's face has gone completely white because she remembers each of these cases, remembers making decisions she thought were appropriate, never realizing they were being documented by agencies with far more authority than her school board. The pattern, Colonel Martinez continues with clinical precision, shows consistent bias against military children who share accurate information about their family's service. In each case, school personnel chose to punish rather than verify, to assume deception rather than investigate facts. Superintendent Williams, who's been growing increasingly pale throughout this recitation, finally finds his voice. Colonel, these incidents, why weren't we notified that they were being monitored by federal authorities? Superintendent Williams, military families are entitled to the same educational protections as any other students. When multiple incidents suggest systematic discrimination, federal oversight becomes mandatory. Colonel Martinez closes the first folder with finality. Your district receives approximately $2.3 million annually in federal impact aid specifically to support military dependents. That funding comes with compliance requirements you've consistently failed to meet. The financial implications hit like a physical blow. Because $2.3 million isn't just funding. It's salaries, programs, infrastructure maintenance. It's the difference between a functional school district and a financial crisis. What does this review mean for our funding status? Williams asks, though his expression suggests he already suspects the answer. That depends entirely on how quickly and comprehensively you address the compliance failures we've identified. Commander Singh pulls out a tablet, begins scrolling through what appears to be a detailed compliance checklist. Immediate requirements include mandatory training for all personnel on military family dynamics, establishment of liaison protocols with local military installations, and implementation of verification procedures before any disciplinary actions affecting military dependents. Each requirement is delivered with the precision of military orders. Not suggestions or recommendations, but directives that will be followed or consequences will be imposed. Commander Hartwell, who's been quietly observing this federal intervention, checks her watch again. Colonel Martinez, I appreciate the thoroughness of this review. However, my immediate concern remains my daughter's academic record and the false allegations made by your staff. It's a subtle reminder that while federal compliance issues are important, there's still a child who's been wronged and needs immediate redress. Of course, Commander. Colonel Martinez turns to Dr. Hammond with an expression that brooks no argument. Dr. Hammond, you will immediately rescind Lexi Hartwell's suspension, remove all references to behavioral problems from her academic record, and provide written apologies from each staff member who participated in today's disciplinary action. Hammond nods frantically. Yes, absolutely. Mrs. Rodriguez, please prepare the necessary paperwork immediately. Furthermore, Commander Singh adds, Mrs. Brennan's recommendation for psychological evaluation will be formally withdrawn and expunged from all records. Any suggestion that military children require psychological intervention for discussing their family service represents a fundamental misunderstanding of military family dynamics. Mrs. Brennan looks like she wants to disappear into her chair. Her professional recommendation, which seemed reasonable 6 hours ago, has just been classified as discriminatory behavior requiring federal correction. Mr. Davis, Colonel Martinez's attention shifts to the homeroom teacher. Your suggestion that Lexi's knowledge might represent a security concern will be documented as an unfounded allegation. You'll receive mandatory training on operational security protocols to ensure you understand the difference between classified information and general military knowledge. Mr. Davis nods rapidly, clearly relieved that he's receiving training rather than criminal investigation. Yes, ma'am. I clearly misunderstood. Mr. Davis, Commander Hartwell interrupts with professional courtesy. Misunderstanding security protocols isn't uncommon among civilians. The important thing is learning to recognize the difference between appropriate family discussions and actual security concerns. Her response is generous, professional, the kind of correction that educates rather than humiliates. Because unlike the school staff, she understands the difference between genuine mistakes and willful negligence. Vice Principal Morris, who's been increasingly silent as the scope of federal oversight becomes clear, finally speaks up. Colonel, what kind of training are we talking about? How extensive is this going to be? Comprehensive. Colonel Martinez responds immediately. All personnel who interact with military families will receive federal certification in military child education requirements. The training covers deployment cycles, security awareness, family dynamics, and appropriate accommodation procedures. She pauses, consulting her tablet. The program is 2 weeks of intensive training, followed by annual recertification. Failure to complete certification will result in removal from positions involving military family contact. The implications are staggering, because in a district with significant military family enrollment, being decertified means being unemployable in most positions. Superintendent Williams's voice is strained when he asks, "And if we don't comply with these requirements?" Non-compliance results in immediate suspension of federal impact aid, formal investigation by the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights, and potential criminal charges for violations of federal anti-discrimination statutes. Commander Singh delivers this information with the same tone he might use to discuss weather patterns. The silence that follows is complete, because everyone in the room suddenly understands that this isn't a negotiation or discussion. This is federal authorities explaining the consequences of discriminating against military families, and those consequences are far more severe than any civilian educator ever imagined. Commander Hartwell stands, moves to where Lexi sits with her backpack still clutched tight. "Sweetheart, we need to go. Are you ready?" Lexi nods, standing with the same precise movements her mother exhibits. But before they leave, she looks directly at Dr. Hammond. Not with anger or resentment, just with the quiet dignity of someone who's been vindicated but takes no pleasure in others' discomfort. "Dr. Hammond," she says clearly, "I hope the new training helps other military kids too." The statement is delivered with such genuine concern for her fellow students that it shames every adult in the room. Because a 9-year-old who's been falsely accused and suspended is thinking about preventing the same treatment for other children. Commander Hartwell's expression softens with pride. "That's exactly the right thing to say, Lex." As they prepare to leave, Colonel Martinez addresses Commander Hartwell one final time. "Commander, we'll need a brief statement from you for the compliance file. Can you be available tomorrow morning? 0800 at the Regional Education Office?" Commander Hartwell suggests. "Perfect. Thank you for bringing this to our attention through proper channels." The exchange is brief, professional, and utterly devastating to anyone who thought Commander Hartwell was just an angry parent making threats. Because she's clearly part of a system with protocols, procedures, and the authority to enforce federal compliance at levels these educators never knew existed. As mother and daughter walk toward the door, Dr. Hammond makes one last desperate attempt at damage control. "Commander, I hope you understand we were just trying to maintain educational standards." Commander Hartwell pauses at the doorway, turns back with an expression that's almost pitying. "Dr. Hammond, educational standards require you to educate yourself before making decisions about your students' families. You failed that standard completely." The door closes behind them with quiet finality, leaving behind a room full of educators who've just learned that their comfortable authority extends exactly as far as federal law allows. And they've been operating outside federal law for months. The hallway outside Principal Hammond's office buzzes with an energy that feels distinctly different from the usual afternoon calm of Riverside Elementary. Word travels fast in small institutions, and within minutes of Commander Hartwell's departure, fragments of conversation begin spreading through the building like wildfire. Teachers pause their lesson planning to whisper in doorways. Administrative staff cluster around copy machines, exchanging theories and half-heard details. In room 237, the same classroom where this entire cascade began 3 weeks ago, Mrs. Patterson sits at her desk staring at a lesson plan she can no longer focus on. Her hands shake slightly as she reviews the parent communication log, specifically the entry from September 15th that Colonel Martinez had quoted with such devastating precision. The entry she'd written with such confidence. "Student continues to make unrealistic claims about family military service. Recommended redirecting toward more appropriate role models." She remembers that day clearly now. Remembers the way Lexi had quietly raised her hand during the family sharing circle, had spoken with such genuine pride about her mother's service. Remembers cutting her off mid-sentence, publicly correcting her in front of 28 other students. Remembers the way Lexi's face had changed, not with anger or defiance, but with something worse, disappointment, the quiet hurt of a child whose truth had been dismissed by someone she'd been taught to respect. 3 doors down, Mr. Davis sits in his empty classroom surrounded by student essays about heroes and role models. The paper he'd marked down, Sarah Chen's piece about military communities, lies open on his desk, red ink corrections now looking like wounds across her careful handwriting. "Lacks understanding of normal American communities," he'd written in the margin. The comment feels toxic now, poisonous in its assumption that military families somehow exist outside the bounds of normal American experience. He pulls up the school's enrollment database on his computer, filters for students with military family designations. The numbers shock him. 37 children in their small school have active duty parents. 37 kids who've been navigating an educational environment that apparently views their family reality as suspicious fiction. How many other essays has he marked down for being too creative? How many other children has he inadvertently taught that their lived experience doesn't count as real knowledge? Meanwhile, in the guidance office, Mrs. Brennan stares at the psychological evaluation forms she'd completed for Lexi Hartwell just 4 hours ago. The clinical language she'd used feels grotesque now. Student exhibits signs of attention-seeking behavior through fabrication of dramatic family scenarios. Recommend comprehensive psychological assessment to address underlying issues related to absent father figure and possible maternal neglect. Maternal neglect. She'd actually written those words about a Navy SEAL commander who was deployed serving her country. The irony is so sharp it's almost painful. Brennan has spent 15 years in educational psychology, has prided herself on her sensitivity to diverse family structures, her understanding of children's needs. Yet she'd pathologized a military family dynamic without any attempt to understand its reality. Her phone rings, the direct line from the district office. Her hands tremble as she answers. "Mrs. Brennan? This is Dr. Sarah Martinez from the District Psychological Services Office. I understand you submitted a recommendation for psychological evaluation for a student named Lexi Hartwell." Brennan's mouth goes dry. Yes, I did. That recommendation has been officially withdrawn and expunged from the student's record. Additionally, I need to inform you that your assessment protocols are under review for compliance with federal guidelines regarding military families. You'll need to report to the district office tomorrow at 0900 for immediate retraining. The line goes dead before Brennan can respond. Retraining. In 15 years of practice, she's never been required to undergo emergency retraining. The professional implications are staggering: questions about competency, fitness for practice, potentially career-ending consequences. Back in the main office, Mrs. Rodriguez works frantically to compile the documentation Colonel Martinez had requested. Every file, every communication, every incident report involving the Hartwell family. As she works, she discovers something that makes her stomach churn. A pattern of notes in various files suggesting systematic skepticism toward military families across the entire school. Tyler Morrison claims father teaches survival skills. Likely exaggeration. Jessica Williams describes mother's classified work. Attention-seeking behavior. David Park. Stories about living on different bases seem inconsistent with stable family structure. The pattern is undeniable, documented in multiple teachers' handwriting across multiple academic years. Not just individual bias, but institutional culture. A shared assumption that military families somehow represent unstable or unreliable information sources. Her computer chimes with an urgent email from Superintendent Williams. Immediate action required. All military family files to be reviewed by Federal Compliance Team. Prepare complete documentation for tomorrow's 0800 review. No exceptions. No delays. The email includes an attachment, a preliminary compliance assessment that makes Rodriguez's blood run cold. The school district's federal impact aid isn't just under review. It's been placed on provisional status pending immediate corrective action. $2.3 million in federal funding now hangs in the balance, dependent on their ability to demonstrate systematic change in how they handle military families. In the teacher's lounge, hushed conversations reveal the spreading realization of how catastrophic this situation has become. Not just for the administrators, but for everyone. Because federal compliance training isn't optional professional development. It's mandatory certification that determines employment eligibility. And failure to complete certification doesn't just mean reassignment. It means unemployment in any district that receives federal military family funding. I heard they're bringing in federal investigators, whispers Janet Morrison, the third-grade teacher. Real federal agents to interview every teacher who's had contact with military families. My cousin works at a school near Fort Benning, adds Mark Stevens, the PE instructor. They went through this kind of review 5 years ago. 3 teachers were terminated, 2 administrators lost their certifications, and the principal was banned from working in any federally funded institution. The conversations die abruptly when Vice Principal Morris enters the lounge. His usually confident demeanor has been replaced by something approaching shell shock. In his hands, he carries a thick folder of federal compliance regulations that he's clearly seeing for the first time. Faculty meeting, he announces grimly. Tomorrow morning, 0630. Mandatory attendance. We're going to go through every federal requirement for military family education support. He pauses, his voice hollow. All of them, because apparently we've been violating most of them. The weight of collective realization settles over the room like fog. These aren't just policy violations or administrative oversights. These are civil rights violations with criminal penalties. Federal discrimination charges that can end careers, destroy reputations, and potentially result in personal legal liability for everyone involved. 20 minutes after Commander Hartwell and Lexi left the building, the scope of the disaster is becoming clear to everyone who participated in Lexi's suspension. This isn't a problem that gets solved with apologies and promises to do better. This is a federal case study in institutional discrimination that will be used as a training example for years to come. In her car in the school parking lot, Dr. Hammond sits staring at her reflection in the rearview mirror. 30 years of educational leadership, 3 decades of building a reputation as a fair and effective administrator, all potentially destroyed by her treatment of one 9-year-old girl who had the audacity to tell the truth about her mother's service. Her phone buzzes with a text from her husband. Saw the news trucks pulling up at the school. Everything okay? News trucks. The media has already picked up the story, which means by tomorrow morning, this won't just be a federal compliance issue. It'll be a public relations nightmare for the entire district. Parents questioning whether their children are safe from discrimination, community leaders demanding accountability, elected officials distancing themselves from an educational system that systematically failed military families. Hammond starts her car with shaking hands, drives home to begin what she suspects will be the most difficult conversation of her career, explaining to her family why her professional reputation is about to become a cautionary tale about the consequences of institutional bias. Behind her, Riverside Elementary stands quiet in the afternoon light, but the building feels different now, heavier, like an institution that's just discovered it's been operating under fundamentally false assumptions about its purpose and obligations. Tomorrow will bring federal investigators, compliance auditors, media scrutiny, and the beginning of a systematic review that will expose 30 years of subtle discrimination against the families who sacrificed the most for American freedom. The evidence cascade has begun, and there's no stopping it now. The morning sun casts long shadows across the Riverside Elementary parking lot as an unprecedented convoy arrives at 0745 hours. Not the usual collection of teacher sedans and parent minivans, but a coordinated procession that transforms the quiet suburban school into something resembling a federal operations center. 3 black SUVs with government plates, a mobile communications unit from the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights, and a CNN news van that arrived 20 minutes early to establish position. Inside the first SUV, Colonel Patricia Martinez reviews her briefing materials one final time. 23 years of military service have prepared her for complex operations, but educational compliance investigations require a different kind of precision. Not the swift decisiveness of combat operations, but the methodical thoroughness of building cases that will withstand legal scrutiny for decades. "Ma'am," her aide, Captain Jennifer Walsh, speaks from the passenger seat. The media interest is significant. CNN, local affiliates, plus 3 education policy bloggers who drove down from the state capitol. This is going to have visibility at the Pentagon level. Colonel Martinez nods grimly, because when military family discrimination cases reach national media attention, they don't just affect local school districts. They become case studies for congressional hearings, policy reviews, and potential legislative changes that ripple through the entire federal education system. "Any word from Commander Hartwell?" she asks. She's already inside with the compliance team. Been here since 0630, reviewing documentation with the federal auditors. Captain Walsh checks her tablet. She submitted a 14-page incident report that's comprehensive. Every conversation, every policy violation, every federal regulation that was ignored. The thoroughness isn't surprising. Special operations personnel don't file casual complaints. They build systematic cases with the same precision they apply to mission planning. When Commander Hartwell decided to escalate this issue, she approached it as a military operation with clear objectives and measurable outcomes. Inside the school building, the atmosphere feels like the morning of a court-martial. Principal Hammond sits in her office surrounded by boxes of files, her usual confident demeanor replaced by the hollow-eyed exhaustion of someone who hasn't slept in 36 hours. Across from her desk, 2 federal compliance auditors methodically document every military family interaction from the past 3 academic years. Dr. Hammond, Auditor Rebecca Chan speaks without looking up from her laptop. "We've identified 47 separate incidents of potential discrimination against military dependents. These range from academic penalties for accurate family descriptions to systematic exclusion from leadership opportunities based on deployment schedules. The numbers are devastating because they represent more than just policy failures. They represent children, dozens of children, whose educational experience has been compromised by institutional bias they were too young to recognize or challenge." 47 incidents, Hammond repeats, her voice barely a whisper. We never realized the scope." Dr. Hammond, the second auditor, James Rodriguez, finally looks up from his documentation. "The scope exists because no oversight systems were in place. Federal impact aid requires annual compliance reporting on military family support. Your district hasn't filed a single report in 3 years. The oversight failure is systematic, the kind of administrative negligence that suggests deliberate avoidance rather than simple oversight. Because complying with federal military family requirements means acknowledging that such requirements exist, and apparently Riverside Elementary had chosen to ignore both the requirements and the funding obligations they entailed. In the conference room down the hall, Superintendent Williams faces his own reckoning. Seated across from him are representatives from 3 different federal agencies, each with their own jurisdiction over various aspects of military family education rights. The Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights, the Department of Defense's Military Child Education Coalition, and most ominously, the Inspector General's Office from the Department of Health and Human Services, which oversees compliance issues that cross into potential criminal violations. Superintendent Williams, Inspector General Sarah Kim speaks with the measured tone of someone who's conducted hundreds of similar investigations. Your district has received $2.3 million annually in federal impact aid for the past 7 years. That's $16.1 million in federal funding specifically designated for military family support. Can you show us how those funds were used? Williams shuffles through financial documents with trembling hands. Because the truth is that most of that money went into general operating expenses, salaries, maintenance, administrative costs, with no specific allocation for military family programs. The federal funding became indistinguishable from local tax revenue, used to support general operations rather than its designated purpose. The funding supported overall educational excellence that benefited all students, including military families, he offers weakly. Superintendent Williams, Inspector Kim's voice could cut glass. Federal impact aid isn't general education funding. It's specific compensation for the unique challenges military families face. Using it for general operations while systematically discriminating against military children isn't mismanagement. It's fraud. The word fraud lands like a physical blow. Because fraud isn't just an administrative violation or compliance failure. Fraud is a criminal charge with prison sentences and lifetime bans from public employment. Fraud means personal liability that extends far beyond job loss into potential criminal prosecution. In Mrs. Patterson's classroom, the veteran teacher who started this cascade by dismissing Lexi's first story about her mother sits surrounded by 3 years of lesson plans, parent communication logs, and student assessment records. Federal Auditor Maria Santos reviews each document with the systematic attention of someone building a legal case. Mrs. Patterson, I'm seeing a pattern of academic penalties for military children who reference their family service in creative writing assignments, oral presentations, and class discussions. Santos highlights specific entries in the gradebooks. Tyler Morrison marked down for unrealistic essays about survival training. Jessica Williams penalized for inappropriate descriptions of base housing. David Park given detention for disruptive stories about military ceremonies. Each citation feels like a nail in Patterson's professional coffin. 35 years of teaching, a career she'd built on helping children express themselves and explore their world, systematically undermined by her own biases against military families. I believed I was maintaining academic standards. Patterson whispers, I never intended to discriminate. Mrs. Patterson, Santos responds with professional detachment. Intent isn't relevant to civil rights violations. Impact is what matters. And the impact of your actions was to teach military children that their family's reality was unwelcome in your classroom. The documentation process continues throughout the morning with methodical precision. Every teacher interviewed, every policy reviewed, every incident cross-referenced with federal requirements. The compliance team operates with the efficiency of a military unit because several of them are former military personnel who understand exactly how military families are supposed to be supported in educational settings. At 1,030 hours, Colonel Martinez enters the building for her formal review. Her arrival signals the beginning of the final phase, not just documentation of violations, but determination of consequences. She moves through the hallways with the bearing of someone conducting an official inspection, noting details that civilian auditors might miss. The bulletin boards displaying student work notably lack any military family representations. The community helpers display features police officers, firefighters, doctors, and teachers, but no military personnel. The family traditions showcase includes holidays and cultural celebrations, but no military ceremonies or deployments. The systematic erasure of military culture from the school's educational environment becomes obvious once someone trained to notice such things begins looking. In the main conference room, Colonel Martinez convenes what amounts to a formal hearing. All school personnel involved in Lexi's case, all federal compliance officers, and all district administrators. The proceedings are recorded for both legal documentation and training purposes. This case will become a federal example of how not to handle military families. Ladies and gentlemen, Colonel Martinez begins with the authority of someone whose recommendations will determine careers and federal funding. We're here to document the systematic discrimination against military families at Riverside Elementary and determine appropriate remedial action. She opens a folder marked with federal classification seals. The evidence shows pattern discrimination spanning 3 academic years, affecting 47 documented incidents, involving over 30 military children. The violations include academic penalties, disciplinary actions, and psychological evaluations based solely on military family status. The formal recitation feels like reading charges at a court-martial. Each violation listed, each child named, each teacher's actions documented for federal review. The scope is breathtaking in its systematic nature, not individual bias, but institutional culture that viewed military families as inherently problematic. The immediate remedial actions required are as follows. Colonel Martinez reads from official orders that carry the weight of federal law. All personnel will undergo mandatory military family sensitivity training. All academic records will be reviewed and corrected. All disciplinary actions against military children will be investigated for bias. All psychological evaluations will be independently reviewed. She pauses, looks around the room at faces that have gone pale with understanding. Furthermore, this school district's federal impact aid will be suspended pending completion of all remedial actions. Restoration of funding will require independent verification of compliance by federal monitors. The financial implications hit like a tsunami. Without federal impact aid, the district faces immediate budget shortfalls that will require teacher layoffs, program cuts, and potentially school closures. The consequences of discriminating against military families now threaten the education of every child in the district. Finally, Colonel Martinez concludes with military precision. This case will serve as the baseline example for new federal training programs on military family education rights. Every school district in America will study what happened here as an example of how discrimination occurs and what it costs. The transformation from quiet suburban school to national cautionary tale is complete. 3 months later, the transformation of Riverside Elementary is visible from the parking lot. New signage welcomes military families in multiple languages. A memorial garden honors deployed parents with a flagpole that flies both the American flag and individual service branch flags. The changes run deeper than cosmetic improvements. They represent a fundamental shift in institutional culture that federal monitors document with satisfaction. Inside Conference Room B, now permanently designated as the Military Family Liaison Office, Commander Rachel Hartwell sits across from the newest addition to the district staff. Dr. Michael Torres, a retired Army colonel who serves as the federally mandated Military Family Education Coordinator. His hiring wasn't optional. It was a direct requirement from the Department of Education's compliance order. Commander Hartwell, Dr. Torres reviews his monthly report with the precision of someone who understands that federal oversight doesn't end with initial corrections. We've processed 47 academic record corrections, implemented new teacher training protocols, and established verification procedures for any disciplinary actions involving military dependents. The systematic approach reflects lessons learned the hard way. Every teacher now completes 20 hours of annual training on military family dynamics. Every administrator undergoes federal certification in military child education requirements. Every policy decision affecting military families requires review by the Military Family Liaison Office before implementation. More importantly, Dr. Torres continues, we've seen measurable changes in academic outcomes for military children. Test scores up across all grade levels. Disciplinary incidents down 60%, and parent satisfaction ratings have improved dramatically. The improvements aren't coincidental. When teachers stop viewing military families as problems to manage and start recognizing them as resources to celebrate, everything changes. Students who once hid their military connections now volunteer to share experiences. Parents who avoided school events now participate actively in educational planning. Dr. Torres, Commander Hartwell asks, what about the staff who went through the compliance review? How are they adapting to the new requirements? It's a tactful way of asking about the teachers who learned federal oversight the hard way. The answer reflects both professional development and personal growth that extends far beyond compliance mandates. Mrs. Patterson completed her remedial training and requested assignment to develop our new military heritage curriculum. She's become one of our strongest advocates for military family inclusion. Dr. Torres pulls up performance metrics on his tablet. Her classroom now features monthly presentations by military parents, displays student projects about different military bases, and maintains a deployment support corner for children with deployed parents. The transformation is remarkable because it's genuine. Patterson didn't just complete mandatory training. She recognized the harm her biases had caused and chose to become part of the solution. Her classroom now serves as a model for other teachers learning to celebrate military diversity. Mr. Davis redesigned his social studies curriculum to include military communities as examples of American diversity. His students now correspond with military children at bases worldwide, learning about different regions and cultures through authentic military family experiences. The educational improvements exceed anything the original compliance officers hoped to achieve. When teachers embrace military families as educational assets rather than viewing them as complications, learning opportunities multiply exponentially. What about Mrs. Brennan? Commander Hartwell inquires about the guidance counselor whose psychological evaluation recommendation had triggered much of the federal scrutiny. Mrs. Brennan completed advanced certification in military family psychology and now serves as our deployment support specialist. She counsels children dealing with parent deployments, reunion challenges, and transition difficulties. Dr. Torres's tone reflects genuine respect for professional growth. Her specialized training in military family dynamics has made her more effective with all students, not just military dependents. The irony is profound. The guidance counselor who once recommended psychological evaluation for Lexi's pride in her mother's service now provides specialized support for military children navigating the unique challenges of military life. And Dr. Hammond? Dr. Torres pauses diplomatically. Dr. Hammond took early retirement. The school board felt that new leadership would better serve the transition to federal compliance standards. Her replacement, Dr. Jennifer Martinez, is a former Navy education specialist with extensive experience in military family support. The leadership change represents more than personnel adjustment. It signals institutional commitment to preventing future discrimination. Dr. Martinez wasn't just hired. She was recruited specifically for her expertise in military family education, bringing 15 years of experience from Department of Defense schools. In the hallway outside, the evidence of systematic change is everywhere. Student artwork featuring military themes decorates bulletin boards. A military family pride display showcases photographs and stories from dozens of military children. A deployment support station provides resources for students with deployed parents, including video communication equipment for virtual participation in school events. Most significantly, Lexi Hartwell walks these same hallways with confidence rather than defensiveness. Her academic file, once marked with suspension records and psychological evaluation recommendations, now documents academic excellence and leadership potential. She serves as a student ambassador for new military families, helping other children navigate school enrollment and community integration. In Mrs. Patterson's classroom, Lexi stands before her fourth-grade peers delivering a presentation about Navy SEALs that includes details her mother approved for sharing. The same classroom where she was once publicly corrected for unrealistic stories now celebrates her military knowledge as educational enrichment. My mom serves in naval special warfare, Lexi explains with the confidence of a child whose truth is finally valued. She protects people around the world and helps keep our country safe. Today, I want to share what it's like being part of a military family. Her presentation includes photographs of various military bases, maps showing global Navy operations, and age-appropriate descriptions of military training and missions. The students listen with genuine fascination, asking thoughtful questions about military life, deployment schedules, and the sacrifices military families make for national service. Mrs. Patterson facilitates the discussion with expertise that comes from extensive federal training and genuine commitment to growth. Class, what questions do you have about Lexi's presentation? Remember, military families bring unique experiences that help us understand service and sacrifice. The transformation in classroom culture is complete. Students who once questioned whether Lexi's stories were real now compete to share their own family service stories. Children with police officer parents, firefighter families, medical personnel, and community service backgrounds all find their family's service valued and celebrated. After class, Mrs. Patterson approaches Lexi with the kind of teacher-student interaction that reflects healthy educational relationships. Lexi, thank you for sharing your family's story with us. Your presentation helped everyone understand the importance of military service. Mrs. Patterson, Lexi responds with the grace that comes from having her dignity restored. Thank you for letting us share our real stories now. The exchange captures the essence of what federal compliance oversight achieved. Not just policy changes or procedural corrections, but fundamental transformation in how military families are viewed, valued, and supported within educational settings. Down the hall, Dr. Torres completes his monthly federal compliance report with satisfaction that extends beyond bureaucratic requirements. The numbers tell a story of systematic improvement. 0 military family discrimination complaints, 97% military parent satisfaction ratings, and academic achievement levels among military children that exceed both state and federal benchmarks. But beyond the metrics lies something more important. Institutional culture change that ensures no military child will face the discrimination Lexi experienced. The federal oversight that began with one 9-year-old girl's suspension has transformed an entire educational system. The compliance report concludes with a recommendation that reflects both professional assessment and personal conviction. Riverside Elementary School District has achieved full compliance with federal military family education requirements and serves as a model for institutional transformation. Continued monitoring recommended, but restrictions on federal impact aid should be lifted. After 3 months of intensive federal oversight, systematic policy revision, and cultural transformation, Riverside Elementary has earned something more valuable than restored funding. It has earned the trust of military families who sacrifice for national service. The revolution that began with a suspended child and an angry Navy SEAL mother has become a permanent transformation that will protect military children for generations to come. Justice, when properly applied, doesn't just correct individual wrongs. It creates systemic change that prevents future violations. The crisp October morning finds Commander Rachel Hartwell standing at the entrance of the Pentagon's river entrance, her dress blue uniform bearing new ribbons that reflect recognition beyond operational excellence. The Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal with Combat V gleams alongside existing decorations. But today's appointment isn't about personal recognition. It's about institutional change that reaches far beyond one school district in suburban Virginia. Inside conference room 2 × 10⁹, a gathering of senior military and civilian education officials represents the culmination of what began as one mother's fight for her daughter's dignity. The room contains personnel whose decisions affect military families worldwide. The Assistant Secretary of Defense for Manpower and Reserve Affairs, the Director of the Defense Department's Military Child Education Coalition, representatives from all service branches' family readiness groups, and most significantly, congressional staff members whose committees oversee federal education funding. Ladies and gentlemen, opens Assistant Secretary Patricia Williams, a former Marine colonel whose own children attended 17 different schools during her military career. The Riverside Elementary case has provided us with a comprehensive look at systematic failures in military family education support. Commander Hartwell's documentation and the subsequent federal investigation have identified patterns that extend far beyond one school district. The presentation begins with statistics that should shock anyone responsible for military family welfare. Over the past 5 years, discrimination complaints from military families have increased 47%. Academic achievement gaps between military and civilian children have widened in districts receiving federal impact aid. Most disturbing, Surveys indicate that 63% of military children report hiding their military family status to avoid negative attention at school. The data suggests that the Riverside situation represents a widespread problem rather than an isolated incident, continues Dr. James Rodriguez from the Military Child Education Coalition. We've identified similar patterns in 43 school districts across 12 states. The systematic bias against military families appears to be endemic rather than exceptional. Commander Hartwell, invited to present the operational perspective, approaches the podium with the bearing of someone who's learned that individual battles sometimes serve larger strategic purposes. Her presentation folder contains not just the Riverside documentation, but analysis of military family education issues that spans her entire naval career. Distinguished members, she begins with the formal precision expected in Pentagon briefings. Military children face unique challenges that civilian educators consistently fail to understand. Frequent relocations, deployment separations, exposure to diverse cultures, and familiarity with operational security requirements create educational needs that standard teacher training doesn't address. Her presentation includes video testimonials from military children across the country. Not just her daughter Lexi, but dozens of children who've experienced similar discrimination. The voices tell stories of academic penalties for accurate family descriptions, social isolation for military cultural differences, and systematic exclusion from leadership opportunities due to anticipated relocations. More concerning, Commander Hartwell continues, these experiences teach military children to hide their family service rather than celebrating it. We're inadvertently training the next generation to view military service as something shameful rather than honorable. The implications extend far beyond education policy into national security concerns. Military families already face unique stresses, deployment separations, frequent relocations, security restrictions on family communications. When children also face discrimination at school, the cumulative impact affects military retention, family readiness, and operational effectiveness. Congressional staffer Maria Santos raises a question that cuts to the heart of policy implications. Commander Hartwell, what specific legislative changes would address these systematic failures? The answer reveals months of collaboration between military family advocates, education policy experts, and legal specialists who've used the Riverside case to develop comprehensive reform proposals. First, mandatory federal certification for any educator working in districts receiving military impact aid. Not voluntary training, but required certification with annual recertification and federal oversight. Commander Hartwell's recommendations carry the weight of operational experience. Second, standardized military family liaison positions in every district with significant military enrollment. Third, revised federal impact aid requirements that include measurable military family satisfaction metrics. But the most significant recommendation addresses institutional culture rather than just policy compliance. Fourth, military family representation on school boards and education committees. We need military perspectives integrated into educational decision-making, not just consulted after problems arise. The proposals reflect lessons learned from federal oversight at Riverside, that compliance monitoring can correct specific violations, but preventing future discrimination requires systematic representation of military perspectives within educational institutions. Dr. Rodriguez presents the financial analysis that makes these recommendations politically viable. The cost of implementing comprehensive military family education support is approximately $47 million annually. The current cost of discrimination, legal settlements, compliance investigations, federal oversight, and lost productivity from military family dissatisfaction exceeds $130 million annually. The economic argument is compelling because it frames military family support as cost-effective investment rather than additional expense. Preventing discrimination costs less than managing its consequences. Additionally, Dr. Rodriguez continues, military children who receive appropriate educational support consistently outperform their civilian peers academically. They bring unique perspectives, cultural awareness, and leadership potential that enriches entire school communities. Supporting military families benefits everyone. The presentation concludes with implementation timelines that reflect both urgency and practical constraints. Phase 1 involves immediate policy changes affecting the most problematic districts. Phase 2 expands successful programs to all military impact aid recipients. Phase 3 creates permanent oversight mechanisms that prevent future systematic discrimination. The goal, Assistant Secretary Williams summarizes, is ensuring that no military child ever experiences what Lexi Hartwell endured at Riverside Elementary. But more than that, we want military children to be celebrated for their unique experiences rather than penalized for their family's service. After the formal briefing, Commander Hartwell participates in private sessions with congressional staff members whose committees will determine funding and legislative priorities. These conversations reveal the broader implications of military family education issues, impacts on recruitment, retention, and long-term military readiness that extend far beyond individual discrimination cases. Commander asks Representative Jennifer Chun, whose district includes 3 major military installations, how do we ensure these policy changes actually reach classroom level? Federal mandates often get lost in bureaucratic implementation. The question reflects practical political wisdom. Good policies fail when implementation lacks enforcement mechanisms and accountability measures. Representative Chun, the key is making military family satisfaction a direct factor in federal funding decisions. Not just compliance with paperwork requirements, but measurable outcomes for military children. Commander Hartwell's response draws from operational experience where mission success depends on measurable results rather than process compliance. Schools that consistently fail to support military families lose federal impact aid. Schools that excel in military family support receive enhanced funding for expanded programs. Financial incentives aligned with performance outcomes. The accountability mechanisms reflect military operational principles, clear objectives, measurable standards, and consequences directly linked to performance. When applied to education policy, these principles create systematic change that extends beyond individual compliance efforts. As the Pentagon meetings conclude, Commander Hartwell receives notification of her next assignment, detailed to the Department of Education as Senior Military Liaison for Federal Impact Aid Programs. The position represents both professional recognition and institutional commitment to preventing future discrimination against military families. The assignment means continued work on the issues that began with her daughter's suspension, but now with federal authority to implement systematic solutions rather than just addressing individual violations. That evening, at their kitchen table in their base housing quarters, Commander Hartwell and Lexi review homework together, a normal family routine that carries deeper significance after months of educational upheaval. Lexi's current assignment involves researching family history, a project that now celebrates rather than penalizes her military heritage. "Mom," Lexi asks while organizing photographs of naval ceremonies and family deployments, "do you think what happened to us helped other military kids?" The question reflects mature understanding of how individual experiences can serve larger purposes, a perspective that military children often develop earlier than their civilian peers. "Sweetheart, change often starts when someone refuses to accept that wrong treatment is normal." Commander Hartwell's response carries the wisdom of someone who's learned that professional military service extends beyond individual missions to institutional improvement. What you experienced was wrong. Fighting to fix it helps ensure other military children receive the respect they deserve. The conversation continues with discussions of service, sacrifice, and the responsibility that comes with military family status. Not just the challenges, but the opportunities to represent military values in civilian communities. 6 months after a 9-year-old girl was suspended for telling the truth about her mother's service, systematic changes protect military families across the nation. Federal policy reforms prevent future discrimination. Mandatory training educates civilian teachers about military family dynamics. Oversight mechanisms ensure compliance with military family support requirements. But beyond policy changes lies something more fundamental: recognition that military families bring unique strengths to American communities. Their experiences with diversity, resilience, and service provide educational opportunities that benefit everyone. The story that began with institutional bias against military families has become a permanent transformation in how America supports the children of those who serve. Justice achieved through systematic change rather than just individual vindication. Military children no longer hide their family's service. They celebrate it, share it, and use it to educate their civilian peers about sacrifice, honor, and the cost of freedom. The mission continues, but now with institutional support that ensures no military child will face the discrimination Lexi Hartwell overcame through her mother's courage and the federal system's commitment to justice. Freedom defended abroad must be protected at home. Military families serve. America's schools must serve them equally in return. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.